Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming to have a little chat about Capability Brown at Belvoir. A couple of years ago, all over England, we were celebrating the 300th birthday of Lancelot Capability Brown, who died in 1783, but has created much of our English countryside. Rolling pastures, clumps of trees, serpentine lakes. Yes, really, England's green and pleasant land. William Blake's words from the hymn Jerusalem. It was Brown that was commissioned to design the landscape extensive gardens at Edgbaston Hall, not far from here, and also Packington Hall. Brown's influence has spread all across the UK. Anyone lucky enough to own one of the 260 landscapes that he created was doing it justice in 2016. So who was he? Well, he was born in Kirkharle in northern England in 1716. He was the fifth of 6 children. His father was a land agent on the Kirkharle estate. The idea in gardening then was to find a more relaxed approach to the previously formal French parterre type gardening. Brown then moved from Northumberland to Stowe, where my sons had been at school. He spent 10 years here under the garden architect William Kent. He moved then to London, he set up a business which he ran for 30 years, and he did landscapes for the King, 6 prime ministers, and the entire roll call of the British aristocracy. I suppose he was like the Shakespeare of gardening. His legacy is alive and celebrated in landscapes all over our British Isles. If Capability Brown provided one ingredient to the recipe of making a great landscape, his clients and the land itself provided the other. But the case of Belvoir, Brown died in 1783, only 3 years after his first visit to Belvoir. And his impoverished client, the 4th Duke of Rutland, 4 years later. So it makes our story slightly different. A few years ago, no one had any proof that our landscape had been designed by Brown, though it had always been talked about. But then, by chance, our archivist found an album of drawings that Brown had presented to the 4th Duke in 1780, tucked away in a dusty drawer in the archives. That opened a Pandora's box of surprises. Again, life is a great way of throwing chance. And then I met this guy called Johnny Phibbs, who's the world's leading expert on Capability Brown and the instigator of the tercentenary celebrations in Britain. On a site visit to survey the estate, we showed him our album. I can still, ladies and gentlemen, remember the shivers of excitement running down my spine. He thought that the album was only a coffee table version of the design that Brown would have had a much more detailed plan. So the hunt began in earnest, with our archivist Peter Foden in the castle archives. We found on a high shelf, really the most obvious place, a survey drawn up by Brown's surveyor, Jonathan Spires, to show the landscape before Brown's proposal. And then within hours, he pulled out another one, rolled up in an aging brown ribbon. This was actually Brown's plan. Every day felt like Christmas, and this gift was no different. We now had the before and the after ground plans. So we had the document, we had the historic landscape, and with Johnny Phibbs' expertise, we started to piece together this really rather extraordinary story. But the tragedy came next. A letter that we found in our archives again that was written by Mr. Lancelot Capability Brown to the fourth Duke shortly before he died in 1783. It said this: "Brown grows very old, and nothing done towards the ornament of the castle. Since it is denied us to live long, let us do something to show we have lived." We'd always loved our landscape around Belvoir, but now suddenly Brown enthusiasts were starting to describe it as a late masterpiece and fashioned by a genius at the height of his powers. I pinch myself living there, ladies and gentlemen, and say to myself, must it have felt for Mr. Brown when he arrived there in 1779? It was a plain house built shortly after the Civil War. During that time, the old castle had been badly damaged. It was in a huge state of disrepair, and capability produced a design for a new castle as well as a new landscape. He wasn't happy, you see, to settle into retirement and knock out parterres of his earlier work. He wanted to do something to show he had lived. While we were poring over documents, John was making sense of these in the field. Our plan, it seemed, was quite enormous in every sense. Even at a late age of his career, at 73, he was presenting hugely new designs. In the past, Mr. Brown had been criticised for wiping out existing formal gardens, but he left ours in. Here we see the village of Walsall, nearby to the castle, which he kept as a vista point with the church. And instead of making the deer park, he embraced Belvoir's medieval history to make a huge feature of the chase. This is the portrait painted that we have in a corridor at the castle. It always amuses me rather, because there's the poor vicar there, always blowing his nose in all the portraits. The castle, as you see, is very different to that. This is the previous castle. But he wanted to embrace the chase, and the family's hunting grounds run for miles and miles around the castle, and they still exercise these wonderful black and tan hounds every morning through the grounds of the castle. Closer to the castle, Brown was well known for this. He designed a 100-metre service tunnel that we call the Dooms, and it's still in existence today. They shifted, and this is where I'm put when I'm very, very bad, and I lock my children here every day if possible. I'm thinking actually, ladies and gentlemen, that we're going to bring the public in this way. It's far more atmospheric, and I think people are far more interested what goes on below stairs than above often. So, when they actually made this, they shifted something like 23,000 tons of earth from the top of the hill where the castle is built to the bottom, that provides this extraordinary approach up to the castle. And you can see where the earth was all moved. This is the round tower that we're looking at here. But I was still pinching myself, trying to piece this jigsaw together and finding out how it actually happened. So I went back to 1780, and that is when Belvoir, as now most probably, had very little money, and certainly little money to start planting trees. So I went back to the archivist in our archives and found a few clues. Luckily, the Duke's agent in 1780 had the great foresight to plant sales of timber, and this ultimately was used to rescue the Belvoir estate. Indeed, our own sales of timber today have been a valuable contribution. We've had no public funding, have spent something like, $250,000 restoring this landscape with a digger and chainsaws and 1 or 2 men. Nearly all Brown's trees were planted by the time the 5th Duke took over in 1799. But it was his young, feisty wife, Elizabeth, who I feel most really in tune with, who continued the plan. Lady Elizabeth Howard, when I speak to the Americans, they love this. She grew up at Castle Howard, which is where they filmed Brideshead Revisited, if you remember that. She was only 18 when she married, and she was full of ideas for her new home. She was led by artistic fashion. The Romantic movement was emerging in the wake of the French Revolution. Architecturally, Belvoir, that we know today, it really does follow a Gothic revival theme. Elizabeth decided she really didn't like Mr. Brown's rather dull plans that he'd drawn up, but she went with James Wyatt, who was the leading Gothic revival architect, in 1801 to create this fairy tale castle, which is very in tune with the medieval history. Wyatt had worked a lot at Windsor Castle with the royal family, and he was much in demand. And for the gardens, she was influenced by picturesque, dramatic, and romantic. This was built at the same time as the castle and is in our spring garden. We have to spend a lot of money regularly restoring it, but I rather love the design. Lady Diana Cooper, who was Elizabeth, the fifth Duchess's great-granddaughter, wrote rather scathingly about her, and they all hated Elizabeth in the family. They said her kind, rich husband allowed her to raze the old house to the ground and build on the old foundation a real castle, neo-Norman, neo-Gothic, neo-everything. Neither Elizabeth nor her husband, fortunately, were afraid of buying into neo-Gothic fashion. The fifth Duke, which is often the case of people who live in these houses, wrote about his husband saying, "I'm no historian myself, but I pride myself on the fact that we live in a home that embraces the past." Initially, we assumed that Elizabeth had implemented Capabilities Brown's plans. But after months more, we realised that wasn't true at all. Many of Brown's trees were planted by the time she got there. She developed woodland gardens with sublime theatrical walks. This is from our private terrace, far-reaching views, grottos that we've just recently done up, rockeries, another one which we've also restored, and lakes. But in 1825, just after she'd had her 11th child, she tragically died at the age of 45. This lake she put in. What Brown was trying to do at Belvoir, in many of his landscapes, was make it appear as if the lake was a river running in a valley in front of the home. All this research began to build the picture in my mind of how the garden was developed and how Belvoir, quite frankly, if you were to come to see us, appears garden-less. There are very few formal gardens. We have a very compact rose garden just in front of the house, but nothing on the scale of some of the other great houses. So there we are, had to go again, back to find out why was this the case. We knew that the Brown's client, the fourth Duke, and his beautiful wife had inherited great debts. But because of his devotion to alcohol, whores, and gambling, it brought his early death in 1783. He also squandered much money on paintings. He bought a set of 7 Sacraments by Poussin. And this is the irony, really, in our story and how it's come full circle. We sold one of those paintings, bought by the wayward Duke, to the Kimball Museum in Dallas a couple of years ago, and that then kick-started the reconditioning of the Belvoir estate and enabled us to complete the Duke's plan and Capability Browns some 230 years before. Patience is the answer with the British aristocracy. We do get there in the end. Once again, my good fortune, when Phil Bird, a dear friend and right-hand man, also has a landscaper's eye. Here he is with Spot, his beloved terrier. He set to work, and after hundreds of hours of a bulldozer and one man, we have restored the whole of the woodlands and the lakes. So in memory of Brown, we've been able to continue the work of previous generations. We've felled 110 acres of woodland, planted 83,000 new trees, cleared 110 acres of overgrown gardens, 10,000 new plants, camellias, rhododendrons, azaleas, 20 miles of roads, 20 acres of water in long abandoned ponds and lakes, all with a digger, Phil's vision, and 2 part-time gardeners. Just after the war, there was about 50 gardeners, but they all had to go during wartime because estates change forever. But not all our initiatives, like all of ours, have been successful. We did employ one said man on his digger, who became so enraged with misunderstandings, he turned up one night and proceeded to smash the bucket into the walls of the castle. The noise was deafening, his point was made. Tractors have been dug out of steep parts when we've experienced huge landslides. I had another sleepless night when trees planted in memory of soldiers killed in World War II were accidentally cut down. Cap in hand, I've apologised to councils and replanted every said tree around our memorial lakes. Problems have arisen with council planners, forestry commission, water authorities. All of this, of course, pale into insignificance if you talk to our head gardener. We have the invasive Japanese knotweed and have an ongoing clearing programme. But of course, the sense of achievement is enormous. One of the gardens I'd love to share with you this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, is Frog Hollow. Elizabeth dug this out. This is where all our guns meet every day for their 11s. In Violet's time, the 8th Duchess, it was a bog garden. Her garden in 1909 described it as a nice water garden with bridges, winding paths and conifers. Violet's daughter again, always rather outspoken, Lady Diana Cooper, said in 1918, exactly as a transformation from Drury Lane. By the time we got to it, it was like a scene from Tsunami. Riding through it one Sunday morning with the children and ponies and dogs, the lake had burst its banks. So I had a panic phone call, and there was a man with a digger that arrived to help us shore it up. In 3 months' time, in 3 months following on from this, everything began to regain control, and we had a blank canvas to start planting. To create the landscape garden that Brown might have favoured, Phil cleverly pushed back the pheasant pens to increase the area for planting clumps of trees. The lake has also, of course, made a fantastic duck flighting drive, which is popular with all our guests. It's great when you marry as a Welsh farmer's daughter into aristocracy and you have the seal of approval. And I had this from this rather wonderful lady called Lady Ursula Darbo, whose funeral I'll be at next week. She was 100 last year, and she shrieked with excitement. And she said, "Darling, it's just as I remember as a child." And here her father is, fishing with his dogs on the lake. Water is such a great feature of Brown landscapes, not least our own. We've had so much fun developing and dredging these lakes, most of all these memorial lakes. It was one of the ideas to dredge the Elizabeth Lake at the far southerly end to restore the whole area to the Brown ideal. So we dug out 8,000 tons of silt, countless scrubby alder and willow, 5,500 native broadleaves have now been planted. This was all part of a programme that featured on TV. It was perfect for television, as it showed how we battled with the elements, but with all the modern technology that we have. And Alan was absolutely charming. I commissioned our artist in residence, an American lady who turned up at the back door of the castle and said, "I want to help you with your artistic work," Laurie, to make this obelisk with the family crest on top to mark the moment of the tercentenary of Brown's birthday. Brown would have had many problems, but we duchesses have had the same incentive to create, maintain and enjoy the wonderful landscape at Belvoir. He has given us all a unique opportunity to show that we have lived, and it's been a great privilege and a huge responsibility to try and get it right. I'd love, before I go, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being so patient, to share with you a few words, again, I found in the archives. It goes like this. I don't know who wrote it, but I just love it. A castle can be built again, a mended wing can fly, an acorn from a dying tree can grow and scrape the sky. And I'll not live this life in fear, that yes, I too shall fall. I'd rather fall and taste this earth than never rise at all. Talking to you today, I've tried to convey some of the magic of my home, but no words and no pictures can ever really put into place coming yourself and me welcoming you to Belvoir one day. God bless you, and thank you for your time. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm free to take any questions if anyone wants to ask anything. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, on the front row, do we still have the railway? Absolutely, yeah. The railway was put in from the nearby village of Walsall to bring, because the family built the canal to bring all the things in from Nottingham for the building of Belvoir in 1800, and it's still there. Anything else at all? Yes. We open to the public for Easter, and I think Mothering Sunday, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Anything else at all? Sorry? Good question. Sorry I didn't tell you this. So when they arrived in 1066, Norman French, they obviously didn't speak English, and so they got to the top of this hill, and they said, Belvoir, beautiful view. So as we know, we're very bad at pronouncing French. So over the generations, it's been bastardized to Belvoir, which is quite difficult when you speak in America a lot, because it has a very different meaning. Anything else at all? Very tame audience today, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say, you're obviously bored or ready to move on, sitting, or you've all fallen asleep, maybe.
How will you continue after doing the programme with Alan Titchmarsh?
Yes.
And continue with Capability Brand? Are you going to expand any further?
Well, my philosophy is that I just try and follow the roots of what have been before. So I'm not trying to make any great changes, because it's just uncovering what was there. But we are at the moment doing a retail village just below the castle, and so yeah, I'm going to go off this stand and run round and find anyone who can help me. If there's anyone out there who wants to run a butcher's in this retail village, or come and help run the tea shop, or yeah, come and see me, please. Anything else at all? Yes. Do we plan on developing the gardens more? So, yeah, no. So as we. I was just so keen to get the plants in, and I think what I've got to do now is make it more visitor friendly. It's a brilliant garden if you're fit and you like walking and you understand the concept. So unlike so many gardens, this garden is about the view, either the view out or the view in, and there's wonderful sort of pleasure grounds within that. But if you're worried about a nettle or a weed or a bit of bramble, we're not the garden for you. But yeah, we've got about 150 acres of garden, so I don't want to expand it anymore. Anything else at all? Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and drive home safely tonight. Thank you so much.